Hello, good evening, good day, everybody. I hope you're all doing great. Welcome to the latest episode of the Ask Abhijit show. We are almost reaching episode 200. This is episode 197. So I hope you're all doing great. Let me see who all is in attendance on the live chat. As always, let's see. We have Alok Bhatt, Mriganka Bania, Aryan Chauhan, Parastav Kundu, Ayan Ali, Prajwal Patil, Elshain Lohi, Om Bekerikar, Raghuvir Solanki, Srivatsa, Ameya Tulpule, Ashok Kumar Nagpuria, Vineet Sangle, Raghavendra AN, Geopolitical Dube, Xmas, Ymas, Zmas, Matrix, Prathamesh, Rakshasi, Rajhaj, Captain Cool, Ujwal Gupta, Surinder Gupta, Harshei, Zubon Izang, Revolutionary Indian, Dr. Suryakant Dagar, Vivekanand Panda, Aradhya and Avyansh, Shagun Chopra, Impermanence, Random Skull, Hello, Pratim Day, Vikrant Marathe, Martian, Ansh Sharma, Groot 1, WRV 1313, Niharika Gupta, Vladimir Chavda, Vineet Sawant, Prathamesh, Amisha Mishra, hello, Vineet Sawant, Summit Statement, Mrinalini, Rahul Dunakhe, Amol Jain, Revolutionary Indian, once again we see three ways as to Pradyumna, Deepank Jangid, Parastav Kundu, Santa Claus is here, Space KGB agent is here, Arush Sinha, even Raf Rapchik, Amol Jain, Siddharth Singh, Raj Purohit, Karan Singh, Aryan Inge, SKSM, Sai Kiran, Pritam Roy, Vinod Krishna, Adit Gupta, Shadow, Anvit, Cinephile, Shreyans. Okay, let me stop quickly now. Cinephile, Harshita, and everybody else. Okay. So, good evening, good day, everybody, wherever you are, wherever in the world you are watching this. Thank you so much for being on the live stream. So, I'm going to take questions that you have asked in the comments. I'm going to take a bunch of those and then I will take more questions from the live chat once those are over. That's what we will do today. Ajinkya says, why are my chats not seen? Well, I'm seeing your chat. So there you are. So there's no issue. So with that said, let's see. Let's see what are the questions that we have for today. Question number one. What is question number one? It is by Praveen Gudaparthi. PM Narendra Modi will visit President Vladimir Putin in Russia next month. What would be the key focus? The key focus would be the entire gamut of bilateral relations between India and Russia, whether it's economic relations, whether it is energy, oil and gas, whether it is a defense cooperation, whether it is the sale, possible perhaps sale or transfer of technology of fighter jet engines, whether it is various strategic affairs in which we have significant areas of convergence, all of that. See, India and Russia, we have always had what we call a privileged relationship, a special relationship. We are not formal allies in the sense that we don't have any formal treaty that establishes us as allies. For example, you can have a treaty of mutual self-defense. If somebody attacks me, you will come to my rescue. If somebody attacks you, I'll come to your rescue. That's a formal treaty of alliance, military alliance kind of. But we don't have any such thing with Russia. But we have a very, very long standing relationship going back to the 1940s, 1950s with Russia when Russia was then the USSR. So it's a relationship that India needs to place a tremendous amount of special emphasis on. And the same goes for Russia. There are very few nations in the world that Russia can kind of count on these days. Russia needs as many friends, let's say, as possible. Obviously, there are no friends in geopolitics, but let's say, let's call it friendship, right? So the Russians are kind of, well, the Americans would like to isolate them totally. The entire EU and NATO and most other nations are along with the US. They're going along with that. So there's very few nations that Russia can actually count on at this time when you have this new Cold War that's kind of broken out, Cold War 2.0. So India is kind of a bridge between East and West. India is kind of a bridge between the Western-led, US-led hegemonic alliance and the nations of the global South. and India has good relations with everybody, more or less. So that's why India is so important in the current context. And India is obviously a growing economy, or a major geopolitical power now. India, so Russia needs India, and India also would like to work with Russia when it comes to various areas of interest. There's a lot that India would also want from Russia. We would like to have a continuing supply of cheap energy, oil, gas, whatever else, which we have then been being reselling to the West after refining it and all. I mean, that's, even the West is fine with that. So we're not doing anything bad there. Um, Technology, fighter planes, perhaps fighter jet technology, so much more. Um, and obviously, we have to understand that the West is not India's friend. We know the various shenanigans the West is currently conducting against India. On the one hand, they would like to say that India is um, the U.S. India relationship is one of the most consequential relationships of the 21st century. On the other hand, they would like to, they're in the process of accusing India of attempting assassinations of terrorists on U.S. soil. But those terrorists are obviously American citizens, so that's bad then. Uh, and they are harboring all kinds of anti-India elements among the Western nations, especially the Anglosphere nations, the Five Eyes nations, especially Canada these days, Khalistani terrorists, and so on, and much more. And we know what they are trying in Burma and Manipur, right? That hurts India directly. So we have to understand that the West is not India's friend. The West would like to use India for its own purposes and then dispose of India. So India needs to know. India obviously, I'm sure, understands this. The government of India is very capable. They understand what's going on. So we need to have as many options as possible. So everything will be discussed in Moscow. I'm not sure how long this visit will be of Prime Minister Modi in Moscow, or wherever it is that they're gonna meet. But it's I'm glad that the yearly summit meetings are restarting. The last summit meeting was in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, when Mr. Putin came to New Delhi for just one day, for just a few hours actually, and he met with Prime Minister Modi, and they had their meeting. Uh, it's typically a yearly event, and then in 23, was it held, or was it 21 the last time? And then there was a virtual meeting as well. And then the last year or so, there's been no meeting for whatever reason. So I'm glad this is restarting. It's very important for India. It's very important for Russia, and it is an important relationship for the rest of the world as well. So that's the thing. There's no single point of key focus. Lots of areas of focus, and everything is going to be discussed and worked upon. Okay, Adarsh Narayan Raut says, what did you conclude from the debate that happened between Mr. Biden, President Biden, and President Trump, former President Trump, on CNN? Where is the US going in the future, and how will they have their geopolitical policy? Look, first of all, let me tell you that the American geopolitical policy, foreign strategy, etc., never changes. Doesn't matter who is the president of the US. It makes no difference. Right now, you have a president who is not functional, who is cognitively not present there. He is clearly not a functioning human being, not even 50%. And his deputy, Miss Kamala Harris, is no better. Okay, but someone's running the country. That's become very clear to everybody now. Someone's still running the country. Who is it? So someone's running the country. There is a power center that is completely extra democratic, extra constitutional, extra whatever. It has nothing to do with the president of the US and the current regime. It makes no difference. So the US geopolitical policy, foreign policy, military policy, etc., will not change. It will make no difference who comes to power, who comes to apparent power as the US president. The real power in the US lies somewhere else. Please understand this. By now, it should be clear, if you have a functioning brain, that the US is a democracy only in name, a two-party system which has the same foreign policy no matter which party comes to power. And even if the president is non-functional, the nation still runs just fine. So clear. I think even the Americans are now, no matter how brainwashed they may be, even they are beginning to realize that something is amiss over here. So the US geopolitical policy, foreign policy, military policy Will not change, no matter who comes to power, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, whether it is Michelle Obama, Michelle Michelle Obama, or whoever comes to power. It makes no difference. All right, Biden is a sock puppet, a puppet. So is Miss Harris. Now, the debate. I didn't. I still haven't watched it. I've seen some snippets and clips of the debate. Um, and what did I conclude? The feeling. See, what was very obvious is that Biden was drugged. That's what it looked like. He was not blinking. When you're not blinking and you're so intense, you are on something. Whether it is amphetamines or whatever, some kind of what they call an upper, which keeps you focused and alert. Well, he looked like he was hyper focused and hyper alert and super aggressive, right? No blinking and those intense statements and just speaking robotically and not very clear. And there were times when the memory disappeared and he was fumbling with his words and he had no idea what word to say next. So clearly the guy was on something, and clearly he is not a cognitively functional human being. Okay, that was clear. I think that was clear to everybody. Even Barack Obama, Biden's former boss, he was forced to tweet that one bad debate doesn't make much of a difference. You have to look at the guy's entire career. His career was in the past. Okay, so it's clear that even the Democrats are admitting that Biden lost the debate catastrophically. It was a catastrophic defeat for Biden, the debate. Trump, even Trump said that I have no idea what the guy said just now. He said that at least once. So, what is my sense after watching this debacle of a debate by the sitting president of the US? I think that he is not going to be the presidential candidate come November or whenever the elections are, whenever the election is. Uh, I think eventually the Democrats will mm, pull him from the race. Uh, by then, it will be pretty clear that he is in terminal cognitive decline. There's no coming back from that. He needs to be in a retirement home and be in comfort instead of being put into these situations. Uh, so I think Biden will not be the presidential candidate when the election happens. I don't think Miss Kamala Harris also will be the presidential candidate. I think she will also pull out uh, in a sense, in a display of solidarity with her boss, with her, well, nominal boss, Mr. Biden. And it could be somebody like Michelle Obama who may be the presidential candidate, or perhaps Hillary Clinton if they want to put her, or whoever the powers to be decide should be the presidential candidate. So the sense I'm getting is that Biden is not going to be the guy who will be the Democratic nominee for president in November. It'll be somebody else entirely. Maybe Hillary Clinton, maybe Michelle Obama, or maybe who knows, Dwayne the Rock Johnson, Oprah Winfrey, who knows, maybe some actor, actress, they, them, she, her, whatever. Yeah, that's the sense I'm getting. Let's see if I'm right or if I turn out to be wrong, and it's Biden who's still running for election for president in November this year. Let's see. Okay, Praveen Gudaparthi says, have you seen the Sean Ryan show a couple of weeks back, in which Sarah Adams, apparently a former CIA targeter agent, whatever, was invited, and she commented on targeting killings of Pakistani terrorists by unknown gunmen? What's your take on that? Well, I haven't seen the episode, but I have seen a 2 minute, clip from that, in which she is saying that the Indian government is paying the Taliban $10 million or something, and the Taliban and the supreme leader of the Taliban is under Indian protection. Indian agents and soldiers or whatever are protecting him, are offering him protection, and apparently India is paying 10 million or something to the Taliban to carry out targeted killings of Pakistani terrorists in Pakistan, that sort of thing. That's what she claims. What do I make of it? Well, lady, show me the evidence. I can say whatever I want. I can say that I am the descendant of Emperor Kanishka. Well, anybody can make any claim. What's the evidence? Yeah. So it's all hearsay. It's nice. It makes well. it draws attention if you are a podcaster and you have somebody coming in as your guest, and that guest makes these incredible claims, fantastical claims. Hey, great for my podcast, I'm gonna get views, yeah, millions of views. All the Indians and all the Pakistanis and whoever else are gonna come and descend on my show and look for that particular segment where the lady speaks about this whatever allegations she's making. My point is, what's the evidence? Has she provided any evidence? No, she has not. Anybody can say anything. So I'm not buying what she's saying. But what is she trying to do? Is she really a CIA agent? Let's say that she is a former CIA agent, targeter, whatever you want to call her. Okay. So what is she trying to achieve? What are the possible things she may be trying to achieve? First of all, she may be trying to draw attention to herself and become famous. That's one thing. But you talk about India, Taliban, etc. In the US, the Americans aren't really interested in these matters. They're interested in Russia. They're interested in Ukraine. They're interested in Israel. India is not very high on the priorities when it comes to interest, among viewers. So in that case, she's not really trying to be famous, because that won't make her famous. If she makes statements about Israel and Palestine or Russia, Ukraine, that's what will make her really famous in the US. So she's talking about India and Taliban, Pakistan, and alleging that India is paying money to the Taliban to take out Pakistani terrorists in Pakistan. So she's not trying to be famous here. She's trying to put out a narrative of some kind. So this seems to be in line with the recent wave of claims by the Americans and the West, even the Australians, that India has been doing certain things. The Canadians claim that Indian assassins took out a terrorist in Canada. They say he was a Canadian citizen. Oh, let it be, terrorist, whatever. The American government has claimed that India has tried to assassinate an American terrorist in America, and they even had somebody extradited from some Eastern European country. Which country was it? I forget. Hungary, something. And now they are claiming that India is carrying out proxy targeted assassinations of Pakistani terrorists in Pakistan via the Taliban. So overall, it looks like they're trying to paint India as a rogue nation, a nation that carries out all these allegedly illegal activities and assassinations and targeted killings and so on. So they're trying to kind of paint India in the same light that they paint Russia and North Korea and Iran with. Okay. And what do they achieve by doing that? They get to arm twist India behind closed doors and during diplomatic negotiations, and extract whatever multiple pounds of flesh they want to extract. Or maybe they want to make Mr. Narendra Modi look great. I don't know. We have to consider all the different possibilities. Maybe they think that they've put too much pressure on India. Let the Indians look a little good now. Let the people of India feel that the government is doing the right thing. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Okay, I'm just putting out various possibilities. Some are more probable. Some are significantly less probable. I'm just saying. So I don't know. First of all, my point is I don't believe this lady. Okay, Sarah Adams, whatever. She has provided no evidence for the claims she has made. So when you make a claim, the burden of proof is on you. Right? When you make an allegation, when you make a claim, when you put forth a new theory, the burden of proof is on the person who makes the claim, makes the allegation, puts forth the new theory, whatever. So she has not fulfilled that part of the bargain. She has not provided any proof. So that's why I do not need to take her seriously. What can be claimed without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Please understand that. What is claimed without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So I don't take this seriously. Okay, 2 questions out of many, I'm sure. Ronak Mondal and Sanya Kondal. Why is North Korea sending troops to fight against Ukraine? Do you think that with North Korea sending troops to the Russia-Ukraine war, it might escalate the situation further towards a world war? Okay, what's the deal? So Mr. Putin recently visited North Korea for the first time in almost a quarter century, almost 25 years. And he had a very warm series of interactions with Mr. Kim Jong-un, and the relations within the two nations are clearly great. They came to a series of agreements. They seem to have signed some kind of military alliance kind of treaty. If somebody attacks me, you help me out. If somebody attacks you, I help you out. That sort of thing. That's kind of a NATO like thing, uh, and there is some speculation now that North Korea may be on the verge of sending military personnel to assist Russia in the Ukraine conflict. And I'm not sure how true that is, but let's say it's going to happen. And the question is, are these military personnel that North Korea may be sending, will they be actual combat troops, or will they be in a different capacity, maybe in construction, maybe in infrastructure, maybe communications, maybe something like that, maybe engineering? So if they are sending personnel, it doesn't mean that they're going to be in a combat capacity. Maybe it's a different capacity. Maybe it's engineering. Maybe it's communications. Maybe it's technical support, whatever, right? We don't know yet. Now let's assume that sending soldiers to fight on the front lines. First of all, the question is, why would North Korea do that? Maybe because they've signed the treaty and right now Russia is at war. So let's hit the ground running in this treaty, and let's send, let's say, 1,000, 2,000 troops to Russia's aid, that sort of thing. Well, then if it's a small number of troops that North Korea will be sending, then it doesn't make a tremendous amount of a difference. And even if they're going to send, let's say, 50,000 troops, 100,000 troops, which is a massive commitment, massive, assume that hypothetical scenario is true, assume for now, for the sake of argument. Even then, what big difference does it make? Russia has way more troops than that, and North Korea is not one of the big geopolitical powers that can unleash a world war. Okay, nuclear war. How many nukes do we think they have? Maybe 20, 10, 15, 20. Let's say 30. Is that enough to blow up the world? No. So that's not something that triggers a world war, unless it sets off a chain reaction that then brings Russia's nukes or China's nukes into play, which could be the trigger for a world war. Because even if we talk about China, China itself alone may not have enough nukes to trigger a gigantic war, or a global apocalypse. To have a global apocalypse, you need in excess of 1,000 nuclear bombs being detonated. Okay, we never want this to happen. We're just talking, hypotheticals here. We don't want that to happen, but that's what we call a world war, in which significant amounts of nukes are exchanged. Nuclear exchange. We don't want that ever, because that is a disaster scenario. It's apocalypse. Uh, so I don't think if North Korea sends troops to fight alongside Russia in the Ukraine conflict, I don't think it's gonna be definitely an escalation. Uh, but first of all, not sure if it's happening, if it's combat troops they're sending, and secondly, if they will not send too many troops, and even if they send a decent amount of troops, it doesn't change the situation on the ground too much. So overall, it's a slight escalation, but not a huge escalation. Slight to medium escalation, not a huge escalation. The Americans and NATO have been talking about sending French troops and whatever else troops to the ground to fight the Russians. They've already approved, sending, using NATO weapons and ammunitions and arms against Russia. So they are ratcheting up the escalation ladder, aren't they? So obviously the Russians will also pay them back in kind. So we are seeing escalation, increased, increasing escalation on both sides, and that's not good for the world. Because Ukraine is a very dangerous flashpoint. So overall, that's where we are. Uh, it's definitely an escalation if North Korea sends troops to fight alongside Russia. It's not a huge escalation, but it's an escalation nevertheless, which brings us slightly closer to what we never want to see, a nuclear exchange between Russia and the US. We hope it doesn't happen. Okay, Rajat Chopra says, you've claimed that this decade will be the decade of the pandemic in a very old podcast. How far is this prediction holding up till now? Okay, the podcast you're referring to is a podcast that I must have done in 2021 or something with Ranveer Alabadia. Must be there on his channel. And in this podcast, I recall saying that the 2020s could be the decade of the virus. Okay. So we have to be very precise when we make claims. We have to use the correct words. I have said that the 2020s could be the decade of the virus. I did not say this decade will be the decade of the pandemic. Okay, so that's one correction there. Now, how far is this prediction? It's not a prediction. I said something could be. I didn't say this will happen. I'm making a prediction in this decade, this will happen. I said the 2020s could be the decade of the virus. That is not a prediction. That's a hypothetical. I don't make predictions. I'm not in the business of making predictions. I'm not an astrologer or a geopolitical astrologer or whatever you want to call it. I talk about probabilities and possibilities. I said it's possible that this decade could be the decade of the virus. Uh, because at that time when we made this podcast, new variants, the Omicron variant had come out, and various other variants of the Wuhan coronavirus had come out. There were multiple waves of lockdowns and multiple waves of various mutants of the virus coming out. So at that time I said this decade could be the decade of the virus. Now how far is that holding up? Right now it's not quite holding up. The media still tries to claim some new wave is coming up and all once in a while, but I think we are beyond that. So I am very glad to say that thus far it's not coming out to be true. Okay, the possibility that this decade could be the decade of the virus thus far, by in midway through 2024, about 3 years after I did the podcast, thus far it's not come true, any of that new viruses or whatever. There's been news of some new viral outbreak here or there, but nothing serious. What was it? Swine flu? Was it chicken? I mean, avian flu? Something I heard a few months ago. I'm glad it's disappeared. I do not want to see a decade of the virus. I seriously don't want to see that. The Wuhan virus pandemic was more than enough. It was so immensely, incredibly painful for the world, for India, especially for those people who are financially not well off. It was terrible for them. It was ruinous for small businesses and industries. We don't want to see that again. So thus far, it doesn't look like it will happen. Okay, but you never know, and I hope that hypothetical scenario that this decade could be the decade of the virus, I seriously hope that it doesn't happen. And thus far, it doesn't look like it's happening. But we got about 5.5 years left to go for this decade. So fingers crossed. Okay, fingers crossed. We don't want that to happen. Maybe this will be the decade of AI, and AI will turn out to be the biggest virus of all. Who knows? Who knows? AGI, ASI. You know what? By now, I'm sure they have AGI, artificial general intelligence, in the labs, um, at the disposal of the US military, the US government. I'm sure they have it by now. Maybe even ASI, artificial super intelligence. What we are seeing is merely the tip of the iceberg. That's possible. So now that you have that, why do you need to fiddle with viruses? You've already tested a few, haven't you? Okay, next. Oh, feminist slayer says, what are the factors contributing to the frequent instances of infrastructure failures, such as collapsing bridges, falling billboards, etc., in modern times? In contrast, ancient structures like temples and pyramids have withstood the test of time, remaining intact for thousands of years. What design and construction elements did ancient builders incorporate that are lacking in contemporary infrastructure development? Okay, now let me answer the question, and I am not going to refer to any X incident or Y incident in A city or B city or Z city. Okay, I'm just gonna give you a general principle that when such things happen in a country, no matter how big or small it is, it typically points towards uh, the fact that there is corruption in the country. Okay, to a certain level. I don't know to what level, high, low, whatever. But when you have infrastructure failures, collapses of bridges or collapses of flyovers or collapses of buildings and so on and so forth in a country, and if that happens frequently enough, it kind of tells you that there is something wrong in the system. And maybe the system is corrupt. What do you mean by corruption? What is the definition of corruption? Corruption, a system is corrupt when it is doing something that it is not designed to do. It is doing something else It is deviating from its stated purpose and objective, and it is doing something that is not supposed to be its objective. That is corruption. That is corruption. And generally, corruption in any country, let's say a hypothetical country X, if you have corruption in the system, it means that the officers or the officials in this system, let's say the administrative process or whatever it is, they are siphoning off funds and putting those funds in their own accounts, in their own pockets, typically. Okay, in any, let's say, some hypothetical African dictatorship country. Okay, so that's typically how it is. The dictator and his entourage and the officials in the government, they are siphoning off public funds, which are supposed to be used for the construction of flyovers and bridges and whatever, and they are putting that in their own bank accounts. So let's say $100 million were sanctioned for a certain bridge, then maybe $20 million were used, and 80 million were misappropriated. So then obviously you will have inferior materials that are used, and insufficient concrete and all that, which after a certain period of time will contribute to the collapse of that particular piece of infrastructure. Okay, completely hypothetical African country I'm talking about. I'm not talking about any specific event or location. So let's say in Africa something like this happens, it means probably that in that hypothetical country there is corruption. That's what I would say. And in Africa, you have something like the pyramids in North Africa, Northeast Africa, in Egypt, Misr, pyramids that have stood for thousands of years. So I can assure you that the kings of that time, the pharaohs, were definitely they had ensured there's no corruption, because those structures still stand, and looks like they'll stand for another few thousand years unless humans fiddle with them too much. Um, and obviously, those are stone structures. Today, you have concrete. You have concrete mixed with sand, and then you have to cure it or whatever you do, expose it to water for a certain number of time, and so on. So depending on the quality of materials you use, the structure will last a certain amount of time on average. So we're no longer using durable materials or super durable materials like stone, which is why today's structures don't last that long. Um, Whenever there is a large amount of rainfall in any part of the world, and if it's a corrupt country or a third world nation, let's say somewhere in the equatorial belt, in, let's say, in hypothetically a country in Africa, then you will see lots of collapses of buildings happening in that region, right? More frequent than usual. So that's what I will say. That's the general principle, that when in any hypothetical country you have such things happening more frequently than is normal, then it kind of points to the fact that there is corruption in that country. And that is obviously something that needs to be looked at and corrected if the government has the wherewithal to do that, or if they have the cojones to do that. That's all I can say. Cojones. Ay caramba. Okay, next question. Annabeth Jackson says, who funded the LTTE? Ah, that's a blast from the past. The LTTE, Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. Who funded the LTTE? Were the diaspora of Sri Lankan Tamils so rich that they could fund the training and weapons for hundreds and thousands of people for over 26 years? Look, this is a whole Pandora's box, a very long story. But to make a long story short, like I am fond of saying, apparently, uh, if you recall, that there were negotiations going on between the LTTE under Velupillai Prabhakaran and the Sri Lankan governments of various Sri Lankan governments. And who was mediating these negotiations? I think it was the government of Norway. Now, what does this little, tiny, little, insignificant little nation called Norway, what business do they have negotiating this? Interesting, isn't it? And yet they were part of the negotiations. They were the mediators in all this. Even when the final battles were happening in 2008, and let's not talk about how ghastly those battles were. Apparently, the Norwegians, I think Norwegians were kind of, was it Denmark? Was it Norway? Was it Sweden? I think it was Norway. LTTE mediation. Let's ask our good friend Google, okay, because my memory isn't that sharp. LTTE mediation. Norway, was it? Norway. Norwegian conflict management approach in Sri Lanka. Norway. Yes, it was Norway. For sure, it was Norway. So I was correct. My My memory was correct. It was Norway that was mediating. So, what business does this small, little, insignificant country, geopolitically not relevant country, have in this major conflict? Well, maybe Norway is somebody's proxy. Norway is a Western country, right? It's part of Western Europe, the Western world. And we also have to understand that the Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora is not a rich diaspora. Okay, some of them may be rich, but most of them are not very rich. So, first of all, it's a small diaspora. And secondly, they're not very prosperous or wealthy. So, who funded the LTT all this time? And now, to understand that kind of, we have to understand this thing that not a lot of people may be aware of. That the founder or the leader of the LTTE, Mr. Velupillai Prabhakaran, he was not Hindu. We think of the LTTE as a Hindu uh, organization because they were all Sri Lankan Tamils. Tamils are typically Hindu. And most cannon fodder in the LTTE were obviously Hindus. But the leadership was not Hindu. Mr. Prabhakaran and his family were Christians. Did you know that? Well, now you do. So that would point towards the involvement of certain organizations, certain countries, something to do with religion and so on and so forth. So I guess if you want to understand what was happening, you can start by looking along those lines. All right. Okay, Gaurav Kivasara says, I want to start reading about true history, Indian scriptures, Vedic literature. Where do I start from? Okay, that's a lot. It's a very, very vast field that you've spoken about: Indian history, Indian scriptures, Vedic literature. Even Vedic literature is tremendously vast. What about the Rig Veda? How do you start reading or learning or reading, like you say, the Rig Veda? Well, why don't we do a Google search, right? Let me show you. So this is how you do some research. I'm going to show you. You go to Google. You say Rig Veda online. And let's say what Google has to say. So there is a Vedic heritage portal. There is a wisdom lib. There is a Rig Veda there is a Rig Veda index. Okay, let's see sacred texts. What is this website like? Okay, it is a translation by Ralph Griffith, 1896. So if you look at this, let's say we look at the book 9 of the Rig Veda, and let's start with the first one. So hymn 1. So it's an English translation by this gentleman called Ralph Griffith, who did the translation or published it in 1896. Okay, so this is an English translation that you get over here. You get a full translation of the entire Rig Veda. But let's say you don't want to see this sacred text. Then you could go to Wisdom Lib and you could cross-reference the sacred text translation with the translation that you have here. I think it's the same one. Oh, this is a different one. 1866. So you have a whole number of suktas in book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5, 7. Okay, let's say we go to Sukta 1 of book 9 and look at this. So over here you have a Sanskrit shloka and no, close that. And you have an English translation. And then there's some kind of commentary. So this is another alternative that you have. What else do we have? Let's see. Then there is a Vedic heritage portal. I will not open that. Then there is the Penguin Classics version of the Rig Veda. Oh God, Vendi Doniker. I will not recommend this at all. So I'm going to ignore this. Then there is the complete Rig Veda in English on the Internet Archive. And let's see how long it takes to open. And who's the author of this? I'm not sure. But my point is, this is the Ralph Griffith translation. Okay. The point is, then there is a Rig Veda in Devanagari with transliteration and so on and so forth. Here you have that. So all these PDF files. My point is, if you really want to learn, if you really want to study, this is kind of where you start. I don't think any of these translations is entirely accurate, but that's the best you have. Or you could learn Sanskrit and Or you could acquire a Rig Veda translation in which is in Hindi, or in whatever your mother tongue is, and that would, I would guess, be more accurate than a translation done by a foreigner into English. So you take that as your reference text, the Sanskrit shloka with the Hindi translation or whatever translation in your language. That's how you do it. It's hard work. There's no shortcuts to this. That's how you start. That's how we do it. And then you go and go for the Skanda Puran, whichever Puran, whatever history, whatever scripture. You will find everything online, everything available for free. Or you can buy books from Amazon if you want to spend some money and have an actual physical copy of the book. Or you can look up the PDFs online and have them printed out if that works for you, or just refer to it on your device, whatever your device is. That's how you do it. You got to start like this. You got to do your own, let's say, research. But I've shown you how to do it. So you got to learn how to do research. If you are genuinely interested in reading the scriptures, the Vedas, etc., that's how you do it. All right. All the best, sir. Okay. Devansh Avasthi says, I wish to read the Chanakya Neeti, but I'm not able to find a good edition, publication, translation, etc. Can you tell me which one you own, please? I don't have any book called the Chanakya Neeti. I have a book called the Arthashastra, and here it is. This is the um, Penguin Classics version of the Arthashastra. I'm not sure if this is entirely accurate, entirely correct, but this is the one I have. And obviously, like I just showed with the Rig Veda, you can find a multitude of various translations online. You may even find a Hindi version online, or you may find the original Sanskrit text online if you know Sanskrit. So pick up whichever one makes sense to you, whichever one you feel is good for you, and go from there. I have the Penguin Classics version of the Arthashastra. I don't know of any book called the Chanakya Neeti. I know these days there are authors who write books called Chanakya Neeti and all that, but that's not what the book was. The only text that we know was that we are aware of that was authored by Vishnugupta Chanakya, also known as Kautilya, was the Arthashastra. There was no book called the Chanakya Neeti. It is a creation of modern day authors who need, well, who want to sell books, who want to be known. Well, good for them. I have nothing against them. My point is, there is no book called the Chanakya Niti. There's a book called the Arthashastra, and I have the Penguin Classics version of that. McLovin says, have you read The Dictator's Handbook? Do you mean this book, The Dictator's Handbook? Yes, I have read this book, and it's a reasonably good book. It's a book that I would certainly recommend you read if you are interested in how power works. It throws some light on what power is and how power works, and it's not just something that is applicable to dictators. It's the principles are kind of broad based and kind of universal. They apply in democracies as well. The book obviously makes the standard the standard claims that Western liberal democracy is superior to Eastern dictatorships and all that stuff. If you're an author and if you're an academic, you want to get published in the West, and if you want to be respected and recognized, then you have to pay your respects at the altar of the regime. So yeah, so that is there. But it's a good book. So I would certainly recommend that book if you're interested in understanding how dictatorships work and overall how power works. And also it also talks, the principles it talks about also are also applicable in what we consider to be democracies. Okay, CK Chaudhary says, due to family ties, I keep traveling to Russia quite often. In the last 2 to 3 years, I have been seeing a huge demographic shift in big cities of Russia. A lot of taxi drivers and other blue collar workers are from Central Asia. What could be the long term effects of this? Will this affect India Russia ties in the future? Look, we know that there are at least 50 million illegal Bangladeshi infiltrators in India. is that going to affect India Russia ties or India US ties? Do those illegal Bangladeshi infiltrators who are settled down in various ghettos and slums all across India, do they affect India's foreign policy? No. But they will affect India's demographics in the long run unless a solution is found. Even if the population is 100 million of these illegal Bangladeshi infiltrators and settlers in India, even then they will have no effect right now on India's foreign policy. But over the long run, over 20, 30, 40 years, they're going to have a significant effect on the demography of India. And the same applies to Russia. Now, I don't think there's a similar situation in Russia is comparable to India, comparable to the kind of Bangladeshi illegal infiltration, immigration that's happening on a daily basis almost into India. I don't think that's happening in Russia. If there are a large number of taxi drivers, blue collar workers, etc., who are from Central Asia, those are most likely legal immigrants. The Russian government is extremely strict when it comes to illegal immigration. They will not tolerate what we in India tolerate. They have higher standards. I keep saying, right? Please raise your standards. Well, the government of India doesn't seem to want to listen to me. They have allowed these many, at least 50 million illegal Bangladeshi infiltrators to settle in India. And what's been done in the past 10 years to evict any of them? Nothing. So Russia has higher standards than India. They won't allow illegal immigration into Russia. So if these people are working in Russia, I would be pretty sure that they are legal immigrants or legal workers. So they may have a visa, a work visa or whatever, or maybe they may be immigrant settlers legally. That could be the case. And as we know, I mean, look at Russia. Let's go to the map. It's been a while since we saw the map. So here's the map. Okay, here's the map. So Russia is this big country here, and we have the Central Asian nations: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, the Caucasus nations like Azerbaijan, Georgia, etc. All of these nations used to be part of the USSR, and they are still very much under within Russia's exclusive zone of influence, almost exclusive zone of influence, and most of the people there speak Russian as a first or second language, probably second language these days, but everybody speaks and understands Russian to a certain extent. And Russia is this very large nation with so many opportunities, so much work to be done there. So obviously it makes sense for people from these Stan nations, Central Asian nations, to seek work in Russia, and the Russians would be okay to have that legally. So I think whatever you're seeing is legal work being done by people from Central Asia in Russia. Let's say they settle down. So I don't think there's millions of them. There may be tens of thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. I don't think there's millions of them. So I don't. And if you look at, I know what you mean, the demographic changes and all that. I think the Islamic population of Russia is about 9.5%. Okay, that is almost half of what the Indian Islamic population is. We didn't have a census in 2020, 21, whenever. But if there was a census, I expect that the Islamic population of India would be about 20% or more. So Russia is way, way, way below that. It's about half. So I don't think there's any significant threat in Russia of a major demographic change of any kind. 10, 20,000 Central Asian workers may not make a big difference. I don't think there's hundreds of thousands of them. That would be kind of almost like an invasion, but that's not the case. So overall, I don't see a big change happening in Russia because of this. I feel it a similar question, I think last week or something like that. So this is kind of along those lines, but I don't see a big change happening in Russia demographically. And it certainly will not affect Russia's foreign policy or the relationship of Russia with India in any way whatsoever. Summit statement says, I'm a Nepali, but I wish I could lead India to make it the strongest and greatest the world has ever seen. I feel that I have the willpower to unite 1.5 billion people to achieve a common goal, know what we are. Can I join politics? If yes, how? Okay, look, I understand why you feel this way. It's because we're the same people. The people of India, the people of Nepal, we are the same people. I mean, Nepalese people can serve in the Indian armed forces. I mean, how much more trust can you ever see anywhere? It means, I mean, no nation will allow foreigners to join their armed forces. But in India, the Nepalese people have the right to join the Indian armed forces and serve in the Indian armed forces. It tells you we're the same people, the same culture, the same blood, same common history, everything. Uh, and I expect that's why you feel this way. Because, yeah. So now the question is, the Nepalese people can certainly serve in the Indian armed forces. The people of Nepal can uh, work in India without any special permit or anything, just like Indian citizens. The only thing that the people of Nepal are not allowed to do in India is vote. That's the only thing. Apart from that, Nepalese people can do whatever they want. They can live in India, they can work in India, do business in India, I suppose, and so on and so forth. Uh, and so I expect, I'm not sure what the situation is, but I expect that it would be way easier for Nepalese people, for a Nepalese person to get Indian citizenship. Because if you want to join politics in India, you have to be an Indian citizen. And in India, you don't get citizenship by being born on Indian territory. We don't have jus soli, we have jus sanguinis, which means that one of your parents needs to be an Indian citizen. So it's the right of blood, not the right of soil. Now, in case you don't have neither of your parents was an Indian citizen, in that case, you can still become a naturalized citizen in India. Um, and I don't think there's any law in India that says that a naturalized citizen of India cannot become the prime minister. It's come close to happening once or twice, perhaps before. So I'm sure that if the naturalization process must be much easier for Nepalese citizens than for, let's say, a citizen of the US or whatever else. So I guess what you would have to do is first become a citizen of India, then join politics. And joining politics has its own pathways and all that. Um, you would probably need to become a primary member of a political party, whichever political party you like the best, and then you would have to work towards the party's objectives, goals, and show that you have the attributes, the aptitude, the abilities to be a good leader, strong leader. And then, if the political party is a merit based party, not a family based party, then you will be able to rise rapidly depending on your performance and your abilities. So that's how you would do it, my friend. Okay. Uh, I'm very happy to see this comment, this question, and I certainly wish you all the best. We are the same people of India and Nepal, and we should work together in everything. Deura 12 says, I recently read about Yucatan caste war. For obvious reasons, the native people of Yucatan didn't know that they had caste until the Christian conquest, when the Christian conquistadors informed them that you have caste system and you have casteism. Sistema de casta and limpieza de sangre are two things every Indian of the subcontinent should read about. Okay, that's a comment, but what's the question here? Okay, let's talk about this entire matter that Deura 12 is talking about. What's the Yucatan caste war? And who are the natives of Yucatan? Where is Yucatan? Well, we have to go to the map. Where's the map? Where's the map? Here's the map. So we're going to go to Central America. Okay. And in Central America, we have the Yucatan Peninsula, which is part of Mexico. The capital is Merida over here. Okay. It's the largest city. I'm not sure if it's the capital, but it's the largest city in Yucatan. And I have spoken about Yucatan multiple times before, because this is where the last giant uh, meteorite impact happened. The Chicxulub impact event that killed off the non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago. It happened in Yucatan. But we're talking about much more recent history. So the natives of the Yucatan region of Mexico, are the Maya people. They're the true natives of this region, the indigenous people of Yucatan. They are called the Maya. Okay. Now these Spaniards, the Christians, they conquered this region, and they imposed a certain hierarchy on the people of this region. The hierarchy was that European people with European blood were at the top of the hierarchy. They were the elites of society. Then people with mixed blood, the mestizos, I believe they're called, who were part European and part native, they were at the second rung of the hierarchy. And at the bottom of the hierarchy, you had the pure natives, the pure indigenous people, the brown skinned people. Chi, 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 chi. Inferior, no? Brown skin. So that was the hierarchy, and the Spaniards called it casta. Casta. And the same system was then transposed upon India by the British later on. So the same hierarchical system, racist hierarchical system, was transposed by the British upon India, and then they accused Indians of being racist against themselves. And I've spoken a lot about this. I need to put those clips up on the channel, but I'll do that. Sure. So, uh, so that is the caste system imposed by the Europeans on the native people of Yucatan, the Maya people. Okay. So, at the lowest rung of the hierarchy, of the caste hierarchy imposed by the Europeans, were the indigenous people. Above that were various levels of mixed blood people, depending on the purity of European blood. The more European blood, the higher they were on the caste hierarchy. And at the highest level, the smallest minority was the pure Europeans. And they were the ruling caste, so to say, in Yucatan. So that was a system that the Spaniards imposed upon the natives of Yucatan, of Mexico, the Maya people. So, what was this Yucatan caste war? It was a rebellion in the middle of of the 19th century by the Maya people against the foreign occupiers of Mexico. It lasted about half a century, from around 1847, 1850, all the way into the beginning of the 20th century. And some of it went on until the 1910s, 1920s, or something, maybe even the 1930s, until it was completely finally crushed by the whites. Okay. So sistema de casta is the caste system which the Spaniards, the Europeans, imposed on the natives. And limpieza de sangre means purity of blood, which is like another racist terminology. Purity of blood means how pure is your blood according to European standards. Purest blood means completely pure white, pure European. Mestizo 50-50 means 50% native, 50% European. And pure native means 0% purity, pure brown, pure native, chi chi chi, inferior, no? So that was the deal. The Europeans imposed all these ghastly things on the rest of the world, and then they blamed the natives for the destruction and all the problems in society that the Europeans had created. And the same thing they've done in India. But we Indians are accustomed, we have been brainwashed by our education system in blaming ourselves, in self-flagellation. Right? So that's what we love to do. We love to blame our ancestors for everything that went wrong in the past 1000 years, when everything went wrong happened under foreign management. You know, when a company, you know about Apple, right? Apple computer. This is Apple. So Apple computer, the company, was started by Steve Jobs in the 70s, 80s, whenever it was. Okay. So Steve Jobs was in charge of Apple, and then there was a coup. He brought in somebody else, and that guy ousted him. And for a few years, for a large number of years, Apple was run by a bunch of other people, and Steve Jobs was thrown out of his own company. And in those years, the guys who were running Apple, they ran Apple almost into bankruptcy. The company almost went bankrupt. So, and then Steve Jobs comes back and he revives Apple, and today it is one of the most valuable companies in the world. My point is this: when Apple was on the verge of bankruptcy, who would you blame for the problems within Apple? Would you blame the employees, or would you blame the leadership, the management? When a company which was doing very well suddenly over a period of time goes, reaches the verge of bankruptcy, who's to blame? Is it the common ordinary workers who are to blame, or is it the leadership and the management who's to blame? Obviously it's the leadership and the management. So India was doing tremendously well for thousands of years. Then the Turkic occupation of India happened, and then the Christian occupation of India happened over a roughly 1,000-year time period. In which period of time everything went wrong in India? Who are you going to blame for this? Are you going to blame the local workers, the indigenous people, or are you going to blame the management who was running the country, the subcontinent? Well, you have been programmed into blaming yourselves and your ancestors. even though they were no longer in charge of their own fate or their own destiny. So this is a lack of critical thinking because you've not been taught how to think, because you've been prevented from learning how to think critically. And when you say things like, when I say some things like this, lots of people will say, "What's up, university? What's up, university? Grow up, guys." Anyhow, that's the deal. Next question is by Sayantan Biswas. What happened to the native religions of Tibet and Mongolia after the arrival of Buddhism? Did they die out? Why didn't Jainism spread to Southeast Asia, unlike mainstream Vedic Hinduism and Buddhism? See, once again, it's a good question, but it demonstrates that we now think of the Indian dharmic umbrella in terms of distinct and separate religions. So today, everybody, including the person obviously who's asked the question, I don't blame you all for thinking this way because this is what you've been taught. Okay, so let me try and explain that the various dharmic schools of thought, schools of philosophical thought in India are all part of the same system, the dharmic system. Jaina, Bauddha, Nyaya, Mimamsa, Yoga, Sankhya, Vaisheshik, Vedanta, and so on and so forth, Charvaka. These are not separate religions. These are all various schools of thought of the same overall dharmic system. These are not separate religions. But the Westerners who ruled us have classified them as separate religions in order to create divisions within the society of India. And then after 1947, various Indian governments have made the situation worse. So today, when I was a kid, when I was a little kid, let's say 5 years old, Jaina people were not considered non-Hindus. They were all a certain specific flavor of Hinduism. That's what it was. But today, Jainism is apparently a separate religion. And today, apparently, Buddhism is a separate religion. So my point is, Jainism, Buddhism, etc., whatever the dharmic religions exist today, I think it's Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism. So these three religions are not separate religions. They are part of the same system, the dharmic system. That's point number one. Now, let's come to the question. Tibet and Mongolia. We know that the dharmic way of life has been part of Tibet for, I don't know, 1500 or so years, maybe almost 2000 years. And what happened when Dharma, let's say, entered Tibet? What happened to the native religion? Well, the native system, religious system, whatever you want to call it, of Tibet is called Bon, B-O-N, Bon. It still exists, and it coexists with Dharma, with Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever you want to call it. Because it's not pure what you would call Buddhism. There are elements of Hinduism also in here. If you look at Japan, it's almost 50% Hindu. They worship, in Japan, they worship every single god and goddess that is worshipped in Hinduism. But the Western scholars and your own Indian scholars will say it is Buddhism. They worship Saraswati, Buddhism. They worship Lord Ganesh, Buddhism. They worship Lord Shiva, Buddhism. That's what they've been teaching you. Okay. Now, let's call it Buddhism for the sake of argument. When Buddhism entered Tibet, what happened to Bon? Nothing happened to Bon, the native religion. It still exists. And today, everybody in Tibet, whoever still can, quietly, in secret, because the Chinese don't want this to happen, whoever still practices some of their ancestral culture, they practice essentially both. It's syncretic. So in Tibet, you have Vajrayana Buddhism, which is a very, very, very Tibet-specific form of Buddhism. It is different from other Vajrayana forms of Buddhism. It is Tantric Buddhism. And there are elements of Bon also in that. Okay? In Tibetan Buddhism. And there are some people who practice more of Bon and less of Buddhism. There are some people who practice more of Buddhism, less of Bon, but it's a mixture. It's a syncretic mixture, just like in Japan, where you have Buddhism, Hinduism that is syncretized with Shinto. And similarly with Mongolia, most people today, they have the swastika, which and they practice Buddhism, etc. But they also worship Tengri, and they also worship Umai, the Earth Mother. So there are elements of the old tradition, the Tengri tradition, Tengri Umai tradition, and the worship of your ancestors, and shamanism, and the worship of forest spirits and nature and all that. All of that is syncretized with Tibetan Buddhism. in Mongolia. So when it comes to dharmic religions, they never elbow anything out. They simply intermingle and create something even way more rich. They create something richer and even nicer. That's what happens. You see that everywhere, wherever you have Indian traditions outside of the Indian subcontinent. If you look at Indonesia, if you look at Bali today, they have a very, very cute form of Hinduism, which is very, very distinctively Balinese, very distinctively local. And when you had the Majapahit Empire in Indonesia, which was the golden age of Indonesia, it was Hindu empire, but a very distinctively Indonesian Hindu empire. Similarly, the same thing goes with Cambodia, with Champa in Vietnam, the Chinese forms of Indic religions, and so on and so forth. It's all distinctively local and syncretized with the local traditions. Indian religions, uh, Indian traditions never elbow anything out. They simply embrace whatever is local, and then it creates something even richer. That's what happens. All right. Why? Okay. Now the next question is, why didn't Jainism spread to Southeast Asia? Look, the Jaina path was very mainstream a long time ago during the Maurya era. For example, our emperor Chandragupta Maurya is said to have eventually renounced the throne, given it to his son, and Chandragupta traveled all the way south to present day Karnataka or somewhere around that region, and he became a Jain Muni, a Jain monk, and uh, he then chose to undergo Sallekkhana. He fasted until he was no more. So there is Jaina, and today Jaina is a very minuscule part of Dharma. I mean, the population wise, but it's still nevertheless a very important tradition in Dharma, and I'm not sure why it did not spread that much. So what your scholars, teachers, historians will tell you is that it is Buddhism that spread eastwards, right? Which is not true. It was everything that spread eastwards. I'm not sure how much of Jaina spread eastwards, but you don't find any Jain frescoes or symbolism in Tibet or wherever. You see Hindu Buddhist imagery. I'm not sure why that is the case, but that's a great question, and I don't think we have the answer right now. So I think I will need to look into this. And probably historians should look into this, and I wonder why historians don't have the answer to this question. But as of now, nobody has answered this question, as far as I know. But I'll try and look into this. But for whatever reason, you don't see Jaina frescoes, Jaina paintings, Jaina sculptures, etc. Anywhere in Tibet, in China, in Korea, in Cambodia, Indonesia, Japan, anywhere, or even westwards, Central Asia, where everything was replaced because of the Turks and so on. Interesting, interesting for sure. Okay, Priya says, you say that the Indian diet is the starvation diet imposed by the British. Then what is the real Indian diet, and what should we include in our diet as the traditional Indian diet? And what did people used to eat in ancient India? What was the diet like? Just curious. Okay. First of all, I have not said, dear lady, that the Indian starvation diet was imposed by the British. They just wanted us to die. They wanted our ancestors to die in these artificially created famines. They created dozens of artificial famines every year in India, so that it served multiple purposes. First of all, uh, they forced Indians to grow cash crops like indigo, etc., instead of food crops, because those cash crops brought the British money, and Indian lives were obviously of no value to them. So there was that, and obviously by starving Indians, they also ensured there was no rebellion, because if you are starving to death, how can you fight? So that's why they created all these artificially engineered famines all across India, dozens every year, millions died every year. I think the British would have killed, I don't know, 200, 300 million Indians easily over 2.5 centuries. Okay. And if you divide 200 million by 2.5 centuries, how much is that per year? What is it, 4 million per year? That is a very plausible number. Okay, the 2.5 centuries, 250 years, 200 million, it's about half a million a year. I think the British killed more than that. It must be 300 million, at least 250 million, half a billion, over 2.5 centuries or so. Now, okay, Now coming to the question. Uh, so the British did not impose any diet on India. They simply wanted Indians to die of starvation. But Indians obviously did not want to die. Our ancestors wanted to stay alive. So they were forced to adopt a different diet, just carbohydrates, just energy. See, carbohydrates are a ready form of energy. There are three major types of macronutrients in your diet: protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And protein is what your muscles are made of. Okay, you don't eat protein, you won't be able to build muscles no matter how much you lift. Fat is the excess storage in your body. Whenever you have excess, you eat excess food, it gets stored in your body in the form of fat. uh, in some cases people have to do it if they live in polar regions, polar bears and seals. They have to eat so much that they have a thick layer of fat that insulates them from the cold. For us humans, it's just something we store for in case there is a future need for energy. So you have protein, you have fat, and then you have carbohydrates, which is typically your pulses, your vegetables, your bread, rice, all of that stuff, cereals, all that. And that gives you, so when your body needs energy rapidly, readily, it typically burns carbohydrates as fuel. And fat is a slow burning fuel, carbohydrates is a fast burning fuel, and so on. Now, the starvation diet I'm talking about is something Indians had to do in order to stay alive. So carbohydrates is typically your pulses, your wheat, rice, all of that. So that's the kind of diet, carb heavy diet, that Indians had to adopt just to stay alive. So today, if you look at the standard Indian diet, it's almost all carbohydrates. You have rice, you have rotis, you have parathas, you have chapatis, uh, you have potatoes, you have various vegetables, you have dals, and so on. That's what you eat. But where's the protein? And we think of this as the traditional Indian diet. Well, that's not the traditional Indian diet. And what was the traditional Indian diet like in the past? Well, we kind of have lost touch with that. There's very few records available, but I can show you something. Okay, so let us go to our friend Google, and I'm gonna Google a very specific word for you. Here's Google, and check it out. What I'm googling here: Manasolasa. So this is an insight. Okay, let's first of all, Wikipedia is not a reliable source of information, but let's, for the sake of convenience and brevity, see what Wikipedia has to say. The Manasolas was also known as Abhilashat Abhilashir Abhilash Itartha Chintamani is an early 12th century Sanskrit text composed by the Kalyani Chalukya king Someshwar III, who ruled in present-day Karnataka. It's an encyclopedic work covering topics such as polity, governance, ethics, economics, astronomy, astrology, rhetoric, veterinary medicine, horticulture, perfumes, food, architecture, etc., 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 poetry, painting, dance, music, everything. It's an encyclopedia, very valuable. Now let's see what it has to say about food. Okay, here's a 12th century fish recipe. Oh my god, they're eating fish. How terrible, right? Today we would say. Today Indians believe that everybody was only vegetarian in the past. Our ancestors only ate vegetables. Our ancestors were never meat eaters, right? That's what we believe today. If you suggest that ancient Indian kings ate meat, many Indians will get scandalized and they will hate you. Here is a 12th century fish recipe. Cut fishes into pieces, wash them well, cook along with Malabar tamarind juice, sprinkle well with wheat flour, fry in heated oil until brown, add rock salt, sprinkle powdered cardamom and pepper. Okay, that's one recipe, 12th century fish recipe. Let's see more. Let's see more. Food and entertainment. So it has foods that are part of Indian tradition even now, like dosaka, which is dosha, iddarika and vataka, which is idli and vada, parika, which is pakoda, Shiravata means dai vada and so on. But here is this: there are meat dishes. Among meat dishes, the text does not include the meat of cow, horse, elephant, parrot, peacock, or eggs. Instead, it describes cuisines based on pork, venison, which is deer meat, goat meat, and fish, among others. So, your ancestors, my dear friends, used to eat pork, they used to eat deer meat, they used to eat goat meat, they used to eat fish, and various other kinds of meat, but they did not eat cow, horse, elephant, parrot, peacock, or eggs. Okay, so this gives you an idea of the kind of diet we had. I've not read the entire book in detail, but if you read it, you will get an idea. And this book, I am sure, is available. There's a University of Kentucky Department of Mathematics that seems to have this book, which is interesting. Why does the mathematics department have it? But let's take a look at what the book looks like, shall we? Uh, okay, Gayakwad's Oriental Studies, blah 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 blah, and so on. This is 518 pages, so it looks like the real deal. Yes, and it is entirely in Sanskrit. Oh my God! A king in Karnataka wrote a book in Sanskrit. How dare he? How dare he? Isn't he supposed to be Dravidian? A king in Karnataka wrote a encyclopedia in Sanskrit. Oh my goodness. What about the narrative? What about propaganda? Anyhow, you see, when you look at actual facts, it debunks so many myths, it punctures so many myths. A 12th century king from Karnataka wrote a gigantic encyclopedia in Sanskrit, and it describes the diet of the time: pork, deer meat, goat meat, fish. There are recipes from the 12th century and so on. So that's the kind of diet our ancestors had, my friends. But today, if you say that Lord this or Lord that ate deer meat or this meat, everybody gets upset and throws tantrums. The past was a different place. So the starvation diet was not imposed by the British. It was something our ancestors had to adopt just to stay alive. They had to eat things in certain quantities that they would never have done otherwise. It was done just so that you stay alive. A little bit of rice, a little bit of whatever, and just eat to stay alive. Whatever's available. So whatever's available generally is not what you usually would eat. That's what happened. So anyhow, if you are interested, check out that book, the Manasollasa, and you will get uh, good information in there. Not just about cuisine, but about so much more. Rajat says most of the European diets include a lot of cheese and meat, and alcohol consumption is also quite popular. Yet they do not suffer that much from diabetes and other such diseases, while Bharat is becoming diabetic by the day. Why is that? Is the question. It's because of the carbohydrate heavy diet. Diabetes is not caused by fat. It's not caused by protein. It's not caused by meat or cheese. Diabetes is caused by an excessive consumption of carbohydrates. What does it do? It makes your liver fatty, and it increases the deposition of fat in the pancreas, and it kind of impairs the function of the pancreas, the islands of Langerhans, and so on and so forth, which turns people into diabetics. And one of the best ways to perhaps reverse diabetes, if it is even possible, some people may be successful, some people it may not work for them, is is starvation dieting. What does it mean? Water dieting, water fasting. I'm sorry, water fasting. You go on a water fast for like 3 weeks or something. It may completely reverse your diabetes. It may not work for everybody. And obviously, you should consult your doctor before you even think of doing something like this. But that is known to work for some people. So the point is, alcohol. Yeah, alcohol. Obviously, you drink too much of that, it's going to cause liver problems and all kinds of health problems. So alcohol. I'm not talking about alcohol, but cheese and meat is not going to cause diabetes. It is the excessive consumption of carbohydrates on a consistent basis for decades which causes diabetes. All right. So cut down on your rotis, on your idlis, on your dosas, on your rice. Eat a balanced diet. 30% carbohydrates, 30% fats, 30% protein, roughly. 33%, 33%, 33%, roughly. And you should have an active lifestyle. You should walk a few thousand steps a day. If possible, you should run every day just for a while. 10 minutes is enough, jogging, and lift some weights 2 or 3 times a week at least, and so on. You do that, you won't have diabetes. So India is becoming the diabetic capital because we think that this diet that our ancestors were forced to adopt, the starvation diet, we think it's our traditional diet, and we think it's what we should eat. And so everybody eats what, 90%, 95% carbohydrates, and that is the reason. So that's why everybody has a pot belly, everybody is skinny fat, and so on. Also because lots of Indians are sedentary these days. So even if you are eating a carbohydrate heavy diet, but if you're really active, you'll be fine. So it's a conjunction of all these factors that is causing this upsurge in the cases of diabetes in India. Okay, more questions about food. AD Guru Prasad says, why do Asians and Mexican people eat a lot of spices? It's about geography, it's about latitudes. So let's go to the map. So we have the map here, and this line in the center is the equator, which divides the northern hemisphere of the planet from the southern hemisphere. And India, I hope you understand, in the northern hemisphere. And then you have the tropics, the Tropic of Cancer, the Tropic of Capricorn, which is not visible here. I'm not sure if I can bring out that on the map, but I'll not try and do that because it will take time. But the tropical regions are the regions which are pretty warm, which are close to the equator. And that's where most of these spices grow: cinnamon, cardamom, cloves, nutmeg, etc., peppercorns. All of these aromatic, spicy plants, they grow in the tropical regions. And the tropical regions, India is very much part of that. Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Papua, um, all of that is also part of the tropical region of the planet. So is Ethiopia, so is a, a significant part of Africa, and so is also Central America and parts of South America. So you will find that the climate of Mexico is actually very similar to the climate of India. And the people of Mexico, they look very much like the people of India. This very similar eye color, hair color, skin color. And Indians, if you go to certain parts of the US, you will be mistaken for Mexicans. And the locals will try to speak to you in Spanish to show off that they know how to speak Spanish. And one faces that in the US sometimes. It's because of ignorance, obviously, but that's what it is. And so, since we have very similar climate, we have very similar kinds of plants that grow, and that's why the Indian cuisine is also very similar to Mexican cuisine in terms of taste, in terms of the consistency, the texture, all of that, the methods of preparation. Once again, very similar, and also you have very similar plants that grow in the region, and that's why you have lots of spices. So it's because of the geography of Central America, South America, and India, Southeast Asia, etc., that we have very similar kinds of cuisines, and we have lots of spices that we use in our cuisines. Okay, Krishna Malhotra says, why was Myanmar separated from India, and when and why? Okay, when did that happen, and why do we never talk about this partition of Myanmar from India? So, if you ask a historian, why was Myanmar partitioned from India? They'll say, how dare you call it a partition? It was a separation. It was a separation. It was not a partition. Partition should not, the word partition should not be used. That's what your history teachers and esteemed history professors and esteemed eminent historians will say. They say, don't use the word partition. It was separation. So what happened? So this separation was done in 1937. Who did the separation? The British did the separation. Did they consult the locals, the people who were affected? They did not consult the people who were affected. So, in the 1930s, in Burma, present day Myanmar. Okay, where is Myanmar? I hope you guys know, but let me put it on the map just in case. We have Bharatvarsh here, the Indian subcontinent, and you go eastwards. And if you go east of Manipur, you have this large country called Burma. It's also called Myanmar. Okay, and the British, it was part of the British Raj. It goes all the way south, and its neighboring countries, Thailand, and it also is a neighboring country of India and Bangladesh, and obviously China as well. So, the British Raj ruled India as well as Myanmar until the 1930s, when the British decided to separate Myanmar administratively from India. In Burma, there were two political coalitions, factions, whatever you want to call it, movements. One was the Separation League, one was the Anti-Separation League. Okay? And like the name suggests, the Separation League was a bunch of political outfits that was in favor of separating Burma from India. And the Anti-Separation League was a number of political parties, etc., a coalition of these parties, which was against the separation of Burma from India. This was in the 1930s. So there was a separation league, there was an anti separation league. Now, before you partition or separate a country, there should be a referendum, a vote, right? The people should be allowed to vote for or against it. That yes, we vote for separation, or no, we don't. We vote against separation, and whoever gets more votes, that should happen. That is called democracy. That's how it should happen. That did not happen. I think in the 1930s, which year was it? 32, 35, somewhere around that time. Look it up, my dear friends. I don't have all the dates in my mind, in my memory, but it's around 1932 or 1935. There was some kind of election that was held by the British in Burma, a local election. And in that election, no party or no coalition got a absolute majority, but the anti-separation league got way more seats than the separation league. And if you want to regard that as a vote, as a referendum, then it was clearly a referendum, a vote against the separation of Burma from India. But the British in 1937 went ahead and administratively separated Burma from India, and Burma has been separate ever since. So that's what happened. It was done undemocratically. They were the brutal occupiers of the region, so they could do whatever they want. And they did whatever they wanted for their own interests. They knew that they will soon have to give some kind of independence or dominion status or whatever to India, and they don't want to leave India intact. They wanted to break India into as many pieces as possible because that suited their long-term geopolitical objectives. So they separated Burma from India. They eventually engineered India's partition, and much more. So that's what happened, and nobody in India knows about this. If you ask 100 Indians as to how many countries does India have common borders with, I would say less than 50 will know that Burma has a common border with India. That's how poor our education system is when it comes to teaching our kids about India's geography or the geography of the Indian subcontinent. Most people don't even know what Burma is, where it is. That's how bad the education system is. And that's why no one speaks about this, because no one knows about this. No one knows that Burma, I mean, no one knows that Burma has a common border with India, that we have shared history with Burma, and much more. If you ask people what is the language in Burma, what's the religion in Burma, most people won't know what it is. And what are the customs in Burma, what's the capital of Burma, most people won't know. So that's just unfortunate, but that's how it is. And that's why we don't talk about the partition of Burma from India, the completely illegitimate and arbitrary partition separation of Burma from India done by the British for the sake of their own interests. Okay, let's take a couple of questions about physics for a change, because I did not do a physics live stream this week. So the question is by Sanskritik Yash. The question is, each element has its own wavelength, which is distinct from the rest. How different is it within elements, and do isotopes of an element have different wavelength as well? Is there a relation between different elements and their wavelengths, as in do heavier elements have a higher wavelength, etc.? Is there a relation between the molecule's wavelength and the wavelength of the elements it's composed of, and so on? So what is this wavelength that you are talking about? I hope that you're talking about the Compton wavelength. The Compton wavelength is inversely proportional to the mass of a particle. So let me put that on the screen. Compton wavelength, the formula for that, the equation for the Compton wavelength, in case we can find that. Okay, Compton wavelength. All right, let's Google that, and I will go to Wikipedia, because when it comes to science, Wikipedia is more reliable. And the equation should be right here. Lambda is the Compton wavelength. It is equal to h upon mc, where h is nothing but the Planck constant, and m is the mass of the particle, and c is the speed of light. Okay, so that is the Compton wavelength. So when it comes to an atom of an element, each atom has its own atomic mass number, right? It has a certain amount of mass, and each element, the atoms of each element have different masses, and that's why they will all have different Compton wavelengths. So you're right. Each element, the atoms of every element have different Compton wavelengths. No atoms of no two elements will have the same Compton wavelength. And the larger, as you can see, lambda is inversely proportional to m, as it's very clear, right? And h and c are constants. So the larger your atom is going to be, the smaller is going to be the Compton wavelength. All right. So an atom of hydrogen, if you compare its Compton wavelength with an atom of uranium, the uranium atom will have a much smaller Compton wavelength compared to an atom of hydrogen. And that's just how it is. When it comes to isotopes, isotopes are uh, instances of an element with different, with the same number of protons in the nucleus but different numbers of neutrons. So the heavier an isotope, the shorter will be its Compton wavelength, and so on. So that's what you have. um, Obviously there's a relation between a molecule's wavelength and the wavelength of the elements it composed of, for the reasons that I just outlined. And so that's what it is. Okay, so yes, that is the simple relation. The Compton wavelength is inversely proportional to the mass of the particle. And each atom, the atoms of each element have different masses, and that's why they have different Compton wavelengths. And when it comes to molecules, the same thing applies. If you have a molecule of H2, then it's going to have a Compton wavelength which is essentially half of that of an atom of hydrogen, and so on. So check it out. Check out the equation for the Compton wavelength, and that will tell you everything you need to know. The next question is by Bharat Bhushan, and the question is: can you explain the reflection of light at the quantum level? So the reflection of light is when you have a mirror and you shine beam of light at the mirror and it reflects the light. Or even if you look at my face here, it's reflecting light that is over here. I have a light source here, and the light you're seeing from coming from my face is reflected light. Okay, it's my face isn't glowing, it's not a source of light. The light you're seeing here is reflected. So how does that happen? And the question is, how does it happen at the quantum level? So at the quantum level, the reflection of light involves interactions between photons, which are particles of light, and electrons in the surface of the material. Okay, any material, metal, liquid, semi-liquid, whatever, rock, it is made of atoms and molecules, and there are electrons in these atoms and molecules. So there are electrons on the surface, in the surface of the material. So the reflection of light, it involves the interaction between the photons and these electrons. So first of all, you have the photon electron interaction. So when a photon coming from here encounters the surface, it interacts with the electrons in the atoms of, let's say, the skin of my face. Okay, then these electrons, they absorb the energy of the photon, they become excited, they jump to a higher energy state, and then almost instantaneously these electrons return to their ground state by re-emitting a photon with the same energy and wavelength. So there is absorption of photon and then an emission of the photon, and the electron goes back to its ground state from an excited state. And the direction of emission, the new photon which is emitted in a direction that follows the law of reflection. The incident angle and the reflected angle are the same. That's a basic thing in optics. The angle of incidence and the angle of reflection are the same. Okay, so that's how photons are emitted. The reflected photons are emitted, and the exact path of the photons is governed by quantum mechanics, which is probabilistic. So probabilities determine the overall behavior of the reflection of light at the quantum level, but at the macroscopic level, it behaves just like you would expect light to behave from the perspective of optics. So this is how reflection happens at the quantum level. All right. Okay, now let's take questions from the live chat. We have some time, so hopefully we'll take a number of questions from the live chat. So, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions that you would like me to ask, that you would like me to answer, please ask me now in the live chat. Live chat. Um, um. Okay, Fire Motivation says, please explain the story of King Baldwin of Israel, and that's something I'm not very familiar with. I don't. I've obviously read of this, but it was a long time ago. It has something to do with the Crusades, and he was called the Leper King. He had leprosy. He could not show his face. It was disfigured, but he was a very brave man, and he fought the Saracens, the Arabs, and Salahuddin Ayyubi. etc. That's what I can recall. I don't have a clear memory of the details, so that's what I can say right now. But maybe I'll read that up again, and maybe we can revisit that in a future session of Ask Abhijit. Um, it's a question I've taken before. The recently discovered Dyson spheres. They are not recently discovered Dyson spheres. These are potential candidates that could perhaps possibly be Dyson spheres. It's not direct, unambiguous, incontrovertible evidence of Dyson spheres. It is candidate stars that could perhaps be Dyson spheres. Okay, but that their phenomena could also be explained by other natural uh, processes, like there being superheated gas or something that is emitting infrared light. Okay, so I have already answered this in the previous live stream, in one of the last week live streams, in more detail. So it is not direct, unambiguous evidence of Dyson spheres, which would, if that is done, if we find direct, unambiguous evidence of of a Dyson sphere, it means we are not alone in the universe. That would be the greatest news of the 21st century, or maybe the greatest news in the history of humankind. That's not the case. Okay, so we have discovered, I think, 7 or 8 candidates that appear to have some of the characteristics that one would perhaps expect to see if there was a Dyson sphere there. But what we are seeing can also be explained by natural processes. All right. Okay, let's see what else do we have. Jasneet Singh says, hypothetical question: if you were to choose a country to rule as the supreme leader, dictator, PM, president, which country will you choose? Cannot be India. I would choose the most powerful country of them all, the United States. And I would obviously want to be the supreme leader. Uh, Clearly, dictator. I mean, that's the best possible way, right? Who wants to be prime minister or president and deal with so many minions? Be a dictator and deal with the best minions who will obey you without question. And I'm sure that's how it works in the US. There is a deep state, or whatever they call it, an unelected, permanently in power group of individuals, and Mr. Biden is just a sock puppet. So I would say, if I had the choice of ruling a country, I would want to rule the most powerful country. And what form of leadership? I would want to have the most possible, the greatest possible power, right? Because why not? Okay. Anu Anukarma says, how does a nation merge with another peacefully and consensually? You would generally have a referendum. So let's say you have a large nation and a small nation, and the small nation, there are people in the small nation, some people who have a desire to merge the small nation with the large nation. Okay, a completely hypothetical case. So what should happen? What's the right way to go about this? There should be a democratic referendum in that small nation. So everybody, every adult, every voting age legal citizen should be given the opportunity to vote. Yes, I am voting for merger, or no, I am voting against the merger. And then you count the votes, and whichever comes highest, you do that. And if the majority votes for merger, you merge. If the majority votes against the merger, you don't merge. So that is something that will happen peacefully and consensually and democratically. So that's generally how it should happen. Janvi says, time for AC opinion. Should one identify as a Hindu first or as an Indian? Well, historically, Hindu Indian was the same thing. So if you consider India to be a civilization, then if you're Indian, you're Hindu, and if you're Hindu, you're Indian. That's how I would see it. I'm sure lots of people will disagree, and please feel free to disagree. I am not imposing anything on you. It's simply my personal opinion. Saurabh says, please recommend some books on Indian to read on Indian politics for a beginner. I have not read a single book on Indian politics, so could not recommend anything. Um, I have read books about everything except for Indian politics. Do you see me talking about Indian politics? About what's going to happen in this state election, or who will win how many seats in that assembly? I don't speak about that because I'm not an expert in that. I'm not interested in that. So I can't offer you recommendations about Indian politics. Sorry, apologies for that. Refreshing Spot says, has the West interfered in recent Indian elections? Is this the reason for the loss in seats for the BJP? Has the West interfered in the recent Indian elections? Yes, it has. Is that the reason for the loss in seats for the BJP? I can't say. Not sure. Possible, but can't say for sure. But they certainly have been interfering. They've been trying their best to interfere. Not just in this election, but they've been trying to interfere within India and in India's political process for a very long time. Much more than a decade, let's say. Much more than a decade. Ansh is talking about yesterday's cricket final, which we won. I'm very glad. I had changed yesterday's live stream timing so that everybody, including myself, could watch the final match. So the question is by Ansh is India won. What were your views when the South Africans needed 30 from 30? There was a point when South Africa needed 27 runs from 28 balls. It was a match that was as good as won for South Africa and as good as lost for India. And from there, I don't know how India managed to win. It is a miracle. So, incredibly pleased that we showed that mental fortitude that we never gave up. They had 6 wickets in hand. They needed 27 runs from 28 balls. Jasprit Bumrah, what a bowler. I think he's the best white ball bowler that I've seen. I have seen Waqar and Wasim, the champions of ball tampering. So, okay, let's not compare those guys with Bumrah. Today, there are so many cameras, you can't do ball tampering. No matter what Mr. Inzimam ul Haq says. Come on, Inzi. It's under you that everyone did ball tampering. You and Imran. Imran obviously was the Shahenshah of ball tampering with bottle caps and whatnot. Imran Khan, former Prime Minister of Pakistan, currently under house arrest or whatever. So I don't want to compare Jasprit Bumrah with individuals like Wasim Akram and Waqar Younis, the champions of ball tampering. So I think Bumrah is superb, fantastic, and obviously Arshdeep and Hardik Pandya. Hardik Pandya has been through a lot. Hate him, love him, whatever he did the job. I really appreciate what he did yesterday. So everybody pulled their weight, especially the three fast bowlers. It was a terrible pitch for spin bowling. The ball wasn't spinning at all. It wasn't biting. It wasn't jumping. So, and Akshar Patel he managed to get the wicket of Tristan Stubbs. So I think overall everybody pulled their weight. It was a match that was won by our bowlers. I'm not criticizing any batsman or everything. Things happen, but the bowlers did the job. And Surya Kumar Yadav, that catch, the first ball of the final over, under that much pressure, he pulled off that catch. Incredible. So overall, great job. I was very pleased. I kind of felt sad for the South Africans. One of my favorite non-Indian cricketers is Heinrich Klaassen. Tremendous guy. I have been seeing him. I have been an admirer of his since what, 2017, 2018, when India played them in South Africa. Chahal and Kuldeep were youngsters then, and Heinrich Klaassen, I think it was his first series. He did a great job even then. And recently he played a tremendous innings against Australia. I don't know, 180 plus or something. Tremendous striker. I really appreciate that guy. I felt sad for him. I felt sad for Miller. But hey, my nation first. So I'm really pleased. So I'm pleased that Rohit Sharma could go out on a high. His first T20 World Cup he won, 2007, which I watched. And his last T20 World Cup he also won. Good for him. Good for Kohli. He also retired. Great job over the years. Great for Jadeja, who also retired. And great for Dravid. He never got to win a trophy on his own, but you could see the emotions coming out yesterday. The kind of emotions I saw from Dravid only once before, which was in 2001, when he scored 185 against Australia, alongside Lakshman, who scored 281. Anyhow, so yeah, I was very pleased with what happened yesterday. Okay. Aruna Vakhalita says, can cricket become a global sport in the coming decades? I think if the Americans adopt it, it could become a global sport because the rest of the world apes the Americans. So if India can manage to make America adopt cricket, it could become one of the global sports. Even Without that, it's one of the global sports, because I think it's only second to football in the number of people who watch cricket matches, I think, because of India's enormous, gigantic population mainly. Uh, so I think if the Americans can be made to adopt cricket, it could become a global sport. And the US team did well recently, didn't they? They've defeated Pakistan. Would you believe it? So, yeah, great. Aryan Johan says, will India legalize marijuana? I Is marijuana illegal? I think it's illegal. Um, it's semi-legal or something. If there is a quantity, if you have marijuana below that quantity, I don't know, 5 grams, 10 grams, whatever it may be, I'm not aware, then I think nobody does anything about it. But if you have in your possession more than that, then you may be in trouble legally. You may be arrested or something like that, and so on. I'm not sure what the exact laws are. I think I don't know why marijuana was made illegal in the 80s or whenever it was, because it's been a traditional herb in India, used by Indians for thousands of years and for various purposes. It's not a recreational drug in India. It's part of tradition, religious tradition. People eat what, bhang or whatever on certain days, Shivratri, etc. So it's part of India's religious tradition. So I think it's kind of semi-legal, and especially on certain days, Shivratri, etc. The cops won't bother anybody. They may also partake of it themselves, perhaps. I don't think it should be made illegal. It's a plant. It's a herb. It's not a synthetic, chemically created drug, is it? Obviously, I'm not in favor of abusing that, right? I mean, why do that? But if it's part of your tradition, it should not be illegal, especially if it is being used responsibly. So, kind of complicated, but I don't know what the government's attitude towards this is. I think in India, the governments, they typically simply copy what the West does, and that's why it's currently illegal above a certain quantity. Okay, what else do we have? What other questions do we have? Um, Anukrama again says, when's the official AC movies and books recommendation stream? I don't think it'll be a stream. Maybe I'll do a separate video. So in the future, sooner rather than later, I will do a book recommendation video. Maybe a bookshelf tour video of the books that I can show you. Some of the books I can show you, because I've got more books than this. I'm not sure if showing all the books is a good idea, but I'll show a large number of books. Okay, I'll do that. Maybe I can do a movies recommendation video as well. Maybe recommend my top 50 movies that I can think of. I could recommend some now, but I'm sure I'll miss many good movies. So yeah, I'll do that in the future for sure. Rakshasi Raj Hey Aj says, why do people of South America, like in Argentina, have white skin? Well, you have to look at the history of the place. When it comes to Argentina, there's almost no natives left there, because they have all been, let's say, taken care of. They no longer exist. I think they spontaneously disappeared from Argentina. In the 8th century or 9th century, if you go to okay, if you go to northeastern England, there is a place called Holy Island. Where is it? Let me search for it. Is it here? Where is Holy Island? Come on, man. Lindisfarne. Oh, come on, man. Lindisfarne. Oh, yeah. Here we are. This place is called Holy Island. All right. And here we are. And there is an abbey there, which is now in ruins. And this is stuck. My point is, there is an abbey over here, which is where is Lindisfarne? Oh yeah, castle. And where's the abbey? And the point is, sometime in the 8th or 9th century, what happened is that a group of Vikings, very selflessly rescued the treasures of this abbey, because the abbey had somehow spontaneously caught fire, and monks had somehow spontaneously died. So the Vikings, they very selflessly rescued the treasures, the gold and the treasures from Lindisfarne. So I think something similar happened in India. When the white people arrived here selflessly, the natives had somehow spontaneously died away. And that's why whoever is left in Argentina, they have white skin. Because when the white people arrived in Argentina, the natives had spontaneously died and left their land behind. So something like that happened, probably. That's what I would say. Fire Motivation says, what could be the most probable result of the upcoming US elections? Look, once again, yeah, I can talk about probabilities. I can make predictions. I think the Democrats will win. I think Michelle Obama could be the next president of the US, or Hillary Clinton, whoever is the Democratic candidate in November. I think I kind of doubt, if I'm doubtful that Trump will win, simply because the whole system is geared against him. He may be the best candidate for the US, perhaps, but I think it's less likely that he'll win. It's Michelle Obama who most likely would win, or whoever is the Democratic candidate. I don't think it's going to be Mr. Biden or Miss Harris, Kamala Harris. So that's what I think could happen. Obviously, I could be wrong. I am not in the business of making predictions. I'm just saying this is what I think could be more probable than the other alternative. Uh, Madara Uchiha. I don't know what it means. Says, can we have a Japanese history special? I could do that. I'm big fan of Japan. They have a very rich history going back 2,500 years at least minimum. So yeah, if there is a demand for it, I could do a special on that. But I'm not sure how many people would be interested. Like when I do my science live streams, it's what's the kind of viewership I have? 1/5 of what I have on other days. If I do Japan, will it be like that? So I don't know. I could do that. It's something that I am certainly interested in. So I'll see. I'll consider that. Arunava Kalita says, do you agree with the views about Osho expressed in the Netflix documentary Wild Wild Country? Well, I haven't seen that. I haven't watched the documentary. So I don't know what the views are that have been expressed in that documentary. I think my views about Osho are that he was a very interesting person, a very, very intelligent, very sharp person. Not sure how spiritually or advanced or whatever he was. Maybe he was. I don't know. And I think that he was brought down by his own, by the people he trusted, by some of the people he trusted. Some would say it was Sila, Ma Anand Sila, who did that, who kind of well engineered his downfall. Some would that's the allegation some people would make. Some people would say something else. Overall, it looks like he lost control of his own movement, of his own thing, and that's how everything went wrong for him in the US. That's the sense I get. I haven't really studied Osho in great depth. I certainly think I should do that if I can find some time, especially read something about him, or read whatever he has written. I'm sure it would be very interesting. I've seen some of his video clips and all. Definitely a very, very sharp person, for sure. Okay, so this is a question I've already answered. Did India use Taliban's network to kill a Pakistani terrorist in Pakistan, or terrorists in Pakistan? A former CIA agent just claimed that. What's the evidence that she put forth? None. So a claim that is made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So that's what I'll do. Show me the proof, or show me some proof, then I'll take it seriously. Okay, Kaushal QT says, thank you, sir. I want to. Okay, my question is, where the Japanese samurai really that strong and disciplined that they could fight off the Mongolian invasion? Okay, so there were two attempted invasions by the Mongol Empire, the Chinese Yuan Empire, which was the Mongol Empire, two attempted invasions of Japan uh, by the Mongol Empire. And at that time, the Mongol Empire was ruled by Shri Kublai Khan, the grandson of the great Shri Chinggis Khan. Okay, two attempted invasions by Kublai Khan. and there was a landing, I think, in Tsushima. Let's go to the map and discover where the island of Tsushima is. So let us get rid of the Lindisfarne. Let's go to Japan. Where is Tsushima? Okay, so I'll just ask the map thing itself. Tsushima. Tsushima. So this is the island of Tsushima, and this is where the landing happened. And obviously, the Japanese fought the Mongols here. But what really happened in both the invasions is that the Mongols, they attempted an invasion by ship, by launching an armada of ships towards Japan. And both times there were very severe adverse weather conditions. The Japanese call it kamikaze, the divine wind, which blew off most of the ships and destroyed the chances of that either of the invasion fleets could successfully conquer Japan. So that's what happened. Obviously, the samurai were great warriors and they were very disciplined. They used to have something called Bushido, which is the way of the samurai code of conduct, which is very similar to the code of conduct of the Indian Rajputs or whatever, warrior. It's the way of the warriors. Extremely tough discipline, extremely harsh conditions imposed upon yourself, and so on. Men, women, children, anybody who was in that class of people, the samurai, the warriors, they lived that lifestyle, very harsh, very hard life, very disciplined life. A very strict code of conduct, very strict code of honor, constant training, constant practice, and much more loyalty towards your overlord, and so on and so forth. So yes, they were great warriors for sure. But the Mongol invasion failed both times because of very strongly adverse weather conditions, storms, kamikaze, divine wind. Okay, let's take. Malik says classified books review, please. Haha, that we'll do book review. I'll do a bookshelf tour for sure. Classified, we'll think about that. Okay, let's take maybe one or two more questions. Okay, the question by three ways S2 is: was pre-Islamic Arabia ruled by Vikramaditya? There is zero evidence of that. Zero. Zero. Zero evidence. Some claims have been made by a writer called Oak. Okay, so which Oak was it? I don't remember which Oak it was. But he made some claim about some poem written about Vikramaditya or something. Well, there's no evidence of that. So a claim that's made without evidence can be rejected without evidence. As simple as that. So there is zero evidence that pre-Islamic Arabia was ruled by Vikramaditya. We know that there was polytheism in Arabia before the advent of Islam. We know that. But was it ruled by Vikramaditya? We have no evidence of that whatsoever. Okay, Aryan Inge says, please explain the Balkan Wars. What was the real reason? Who was behind it? And who was Slobodan Milosevic? Look, if you want me to talk about the Balkans, I cannot explain that in 2 minutes or 5 minutes or even 10 minutes. The Balkans are a very, very, very complicated region. I can show you where this region is. It's the erstwhile Yugoslavia region. Okay, you know Rome like a boot. Sorry, Italy looks like a boot, right? And if you cross the Adriatic Sea to the east of Italy, you have the Balkans. Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, North Macedonia, Kosovo, Bulgaria. In Romania, they could consider the Balkans. This region, it has an extremely complex, complicated history. See, what I can say in very brief is that after the dissolution of the USSR, the Balkan region, the nation of Yugoslavia, which was a part of the Soviet bloc, the US, NATO, they made it a point to disintegrate that nation. to show that we are now in charge and we'll do whatever we want. So Yugoslavia was broken up, and all these little nations came out of that: Serbia, Croatia, uh, Montenegro, so on and so forth. And then there were these wars, these old conflicts reignited. The First World War also started in the Balkans, by the way. So I will not be able to explain this over here. I would need a 30-minute video at least to explain what the whole thing is. Slobodan Milosevic is an alleged war criminal. That's what they say. Long story. So I can't give you the answer right now. I would need a much longer amount of time to explain that. But yeah, it's a pertinent question for sure. Maybe one or two questions. McLevin says, do you think marriage is worth it in modern times, especially for men? I think the entire system, whether it's in the West, whether it's in India, is kind of geared against men. So men can be victimized, and the law and the entire system will stand against men, take the side of the women, and then men have to suffer. So is marriage worthwhile in modern times for men? I think it's worthwhile if you can find the right partner. Finding the right partner is obviously very difficult. It's a choice, it's a decision in life that will either make or break you. Difficult. Historically, you would take the help of your elders of your family, who would do the due diligence when looking for partners, and then you would know that you are marrying the right person. That was called an arranged marriage, and that is now a taboo thing. Oh my God, how regressive arranged marriage. Yeah. Okay, then you go and find your own partner in a random fashion and then see what happens to you. And obviously, these days, everything is influenced by the West, so there is so much more promiscuity in India, and everybody has multiple partners or a string of partners and all that. I think there is regrettable. There is no, I don't see what fun there is in that, but that's just what it is today. So things are bad, and it's the system is geared against men, for sure. So I think it is still worthwhile to have a family, to get married and have children. It's one of the most important things that you can do. But yes, the choice of partner is something that will either destroy your life or make your life. So you gotta be very careful in that. That's what I can say. Times keep on changing and circumstances change. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. Right now it's harder for men. Okay, I think we are almost at the end. Let's see if I can find one good question that I find interesting, really interesting. Karan Nalawat says, why is Kalari Payutu not as famous as Kung Fu or other martial arts? Kalari Payutu is more like a performing art, not like a martial art. It's more like a dance, a hybrid of a dance form and a martial art form. Not really a combat sport. There's open hand striking. Open hand striking. You're gonna punch, right? So I'm sure there's multiple reasons. Some people claim that Kalari Payutu is the is the root or the originator of Kung Fu. There's no evidence for that either. So I don't know, but it's not that much of a combat sport as the way Kung Fu is. If you were to have a match of styles, Kung Fu against Kalari Payutu, or Karate against Kalari Payutu, or Krav Maga against Kalari Payutu, I don't think Kalari Payutu will come out to be as effective, will come out on top. It's more of a performing art than a martial art. That's how I see it. Obviously, people will disagree with that also, but that's just the way it is. Okay. Are we done? Do we have anything else? We have lots of other questions, but what could I take as a last question? Okay, okay. Banku Nath Singh says, how would you summarize our World Cup victory yesterday? I think it was wonderful. It was glorious. And they certainly did raise their standards. And I would urge you all to do the same. Dheeraj Kamath says, why are you ignoring me, sir? I just saw your thing just now. I'm not ignoring you. Okay, I'm not ignoring you. There are thousands of people on the live stream. It's hard to notice one person out of that. Please don't take it personally if I don't see your questions. All right. Mansi says, how do you remember so much stuff? What do you do in your leisure time? I don't have leisure time. How do I remember stuff? I remember stuff that interests me. I don't remember stuff that I have no interest in. So I only speak about what I find interesting. Okay. That's just how it is. You watch movies. I'm sure people watch movies and they remember the entire stories. And I'm sure you remember the entire story arc of your favorite TV series or whatever TV serials. So you can remember so much, right? Because you find it interesting. So similarly, there are things I find interesting and I remember that. You ask me stuff about things I have no interest in, I will remember nothing of that, even if I may have studied that. That's how it is. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna end this now. We have crossed 2 hours, so it's a good time to end this particular live stream. Next week there could be some changes to the schedule. I still don't know for sure, but I will let you know as soon as I have some understanding. Maybe I will release 3 podcasts next week and have maybe fewer live streams. I will let you know as soon as I have some clarity. Okay. Until then, I'm gonna end this, and we're gonna meet very soon whenever it happens. So take care. Take care of yourselves and keep raising your standards as always. I'll see you very soon. Bye.